This is Outnumbered. I'm Andrea Tantaros, and here with us today, Harris Faulkner, editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, National Review columnist, Kat Timpf is back, and today's hashtag One Lucky Guy, Fox News contributor, and Republican operative, Tony Sayegh. Ooh. And Tony, you are outnumbered.
Feels great. Thanks for having me. Early Christmas gift.
So you went from strategist to operative.
Wow, that's pretty aggressive.
I gave him a promotion.
I love it.
I like that.
Because I think that strategist doesn't do you justice.
Yeah, you sound dorky if you're a strategist. You know, operative means you get into the grassroots. You take care of business. Strategery.
Yes. All right, let's get to the political news. A big battle between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton after Hillary said this about the Republican frontrunner on the topic of Muslim relations at the Democratic debate on Saturday night. Listen.
We also need to make sure that the really discriminatory messages that Trump is sending around the world don't fall on receptive ears. He is becoming ISIS's best recruiter. They are going to people showing videos of Donald Trump insulting Islam and Muslims in order to recruit more radical jihadists.
Well, there's just one little problem with that. According to the folks at PolitiFact, there's no evidence of ISIS using Trump videos as a recruitment tool, and Trump isn't having it.
It's nonsense. It's just another Hillary lie. She lies like crazy about everything, whether it's trips where she was being gunned down in a helicopter or an airplane. She's a liar, and everybody knows that. I mean, but she just made this up in thin air.
Well, now it falls to Clinton communications chief Jennifer Palmieri to try to walk back her boss's remarks.
What Secretary Clinton was saying last night is that one of the many dangerous things about Donald Trump is that his hot rhetoric, saying we should not allow Muslim refugees into the country, is being used, and this is something that the Sayegh International Group has, who monitors social media and on ISIS, has said
but there have been no videos.
Well, what they have said is that they are using him. He is being used in social media by ISIS as propaganda. She didn't have a particular video in mind, but he is being used in social media.
Wow. Humana. Someone bought some Maalox. That's a tough job because it's clear that Hillary Clinton went out there and again lied to the American public and blamed a video that didn't exist.
Shocker, right? I mean, Donald Trump should have mentioned that Benghazi YouTube, which we still know was a totally fabricated storyline out of the White House to detract away from what really happened in Benghazi. But the thing that's incredible to me is this has been the Democratic line since the whole idea that perhaps we should suspend the Syrian refugee program. So if you were a Republican presidential candidate and you said that, and by the way, you had 47 Democrats in Congress who agreed with you, you were now the best recruitment tool for ISIS. All of a sudden, Donald Trump takes it a little further, says the anti-Muslim ban. Hillary uses the same exact line President Obama used. I would say the best recruitment tool for ISIS is an American president without a strategy or the will to defeat them. This is a caliphate, a religiously driven group that believes in the divinity and supremacy of their mission. The Allah is on their side. So the only way you actually dispel them of that thought is by beating them, destroying them, and defeating them, and that's not what we've been doing.
Well, and Hillary Clinton is the one that advocated for the ousting of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, Harris, and we know what happened after that. ISIS took control and arguably uses that country as a launching pad for attacks. We saw them doing swan dives, I believe it was, off our consulate there. I mean, she has actually empowered and assisted ISIS.
Yeah, we're going to get more into why she is backing her own strategy and so happy to be where we are in just a moment. But I will say this, you know, Seamus Hughes, who runs that he's an extremist expert, the Associated Press also saying they don't see any evidence of what she's talking about in Donald Trump. This is one of those things where she's probably going to have to prove it. Yeah. Like, she's probably going to have to prove it, or she's going to have to say something. Jennifer Palmieri, paychecks have better not stop coming. That girl took some incoming. Yeah. I mean, boom, she's just taking it. But that's not the voice the American public wants to hear this from. These are really strong words at a time when these vicious savages want to kill us, kill anybody who lives the way we do. She needs some evidence on this one. And if she doesn't have it, I think she had better step up to the plate and say she's sorry.
Well, Katie, she downplayed the threat of ISIS at the debate. That's not true. The New York Times fact-checking a lot of the things that she said. We know that she's lied consistently, and she's got a credibility problem. I mean, her numbers aren't They're not where they should be.
Right.
So how does this affect her campaign? I mean, Democrats just seem to believe whatever she says.
Well, I think it's important to point out that Carly Fiorina's been calling not Donald Trump, she's been calling Hillary Clinton a liar for months now. And when she said it a couple months ago, it was this huge deal, and she got, cream for it in the press for saying it. But it's true. Hillary Clinton is a liar. But in this sense, do you remember when Hillary Clinton said that her enemies were Republicans?
Yeah.
She didn't say ISIS. She's making it more clear as she continues to talk about this issue that Republicans really are her main focus and her enemy. She's blaming Donald Trump and the American political process as a whole for ISIS recruitment rather than actually pointing out what the threat is and just simply talking about it in a bipartisan fashion. How are we going to deal with the problems? This isn't an issue that has to be political left and right. This is an issue she could talk about in a sense of a general election. But apparently she just has to make stuff up to get her point across.
Well, we know, too, that she doesn't listen to the generals. I mean, maybe her friend Sid Blumenthal, gave her this information that she used on the video and other sources. But, Kat, this is a woman that we've seen. Not only is she incompetent because she couldn't protect our embassy, she, leading up to this, ignored emails, multiple requests from her friend for additional security. She wasn't able to do her job, so she's incompetent at best. Then, that night, she said that she could handle Benghazi with Leon Panetta. We know this. We didn't show up that night. The blood of 4 Americans is on her hands, and then she went and covered it up and blamed it on a video and allocated millions of dollars to Pakistan to take out apology ads based on a lie. I mean, this woman is a perpetual liar who's incompetent.
Right. I think that's why.
When does she get called out?
The debates are always on Saturdays or Fridays, I think, because she's so bad at it. She says bizarre stuff like ISIS is Donald Trump's fault. Remember when she said that Wall Street ties were because of 9/11? Or she's being very boring. I think they try to do whatever they can to make it so she has the least amount of scrutiny and they can just control what messages are going out there, because she does have a lot of skeletons in her closet. So many.
Yeah.
So many.
Well, Leslie Harris, you look at something like this and you see that she's being called out by the New York Times and others, and you wonder how much longer can the Clinton lie machine, I mean, they've gotten away with it for a long time. When does it end?
Well, Donald Trump has a way of defending himself, coming out strong.
Maybe it stops now.
And that's what I'm saying. I mean, we don't know what's coming next. If you were giving her some advice, Tony, I would imagine I could hear you saying these words. Yeah, we got to walk that back.
Yeah,
but anyway, we're going to walk it forward. And the hits keep coming from the weekend Democratic debate. And here's what Hillary Clinton said about the progress of the U.S. fight against ISIS.
We now finally are where we need to be. We have a strategy and a commitment to go after ISIS, which is a danger to us as well as the region.
Many of the Republican candidates pounced on those comments, saying they made the former Secretary of State appear out of touch.
With dead bodies in Paris, with dead bodies in San Bernardino, and with no plan from this administration about how to deal with it, we're finally where we need to be. I mean, Mrs. Clinton is Mrs. Happy Talk. And she just wants to happy talk her way to the presidency.
How did the American people supposed to feel when they feel as vulnerable as ever to these terrorist attacks, and you have a president and a leading contender for the Democratic primary arguing, oh, everything's going great, we've got this really good plan in place, and it's starting to work? They live in 2 different universes.
Incredible, honestly. Somehow a UN resolution about Syria puts us where we need to be. I think it is a reflection of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama's belief that our foreign policy gets set by others, that she's gotten every single foreign policy challenge wrong. And no, Mrs. Clinton, we are not where we need to be.
Wow. Well, you know what? If you didn't get it there, maybe you'll get it here. A new Fox News poll indicates Americans say we are not where we need to be on taking out the Islamic State savages. Just 33% approve of President Obama's handling of the fight.
In 1976, Gerald Ford, in a presidential debate, made the claim that there was no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and that began the precipitous decline of his candidacy because it showed him as so out of touch on foreign policy. I think the same liability exists here for Secretary Clinton. Furthermore, while I think all these Republicans are right to begin to focus in on this, because this was a big gaffe. I mean, I know the media is trying to help her out a little bit, and some of her colleagues are rushing to say, well, she was referring specifically to the UN Security Council, which is in and of itself kind of esoteric nonsense. The reality is, it's more than what they're saying. Hillary Clinton was part of the policy of which the byproduct was ISIS.
Right.
And as we decide that this is an intelligence failure or a military failure and the whole goal of the administration to withdraw, it's more than that. It was a diplomatic failure while she was Secretary of State to control Maliki, the Iraq president who was a Shiite, who then persecuted the Sunnis, who then ran and formed ISIS as a result.
Wow, that was a almost straight line.
Like that?
So on the Political Insiders on Fox Report on Sunday nights, we have two Democrats on set with me, and both of them agreed, Pat Caddell and Doug Schoen last night, that Hillary Clinton sort of leaned toward looking more like President Obama could be more and more in the coming days because she's worried about the early primary states. And she knows that if she doesn't, what are your thoughts?
Well, we've for months been talking about how Hillary Clinton's going to have to walk this line of not criticizing the administration while trying to prove how she's going to not be serving an Obama third term, right? So in this sense, she is towing the line of the administration by saying where we need to be. But when you look at President Obama's polling numbers on this issue of terrorism and overall his polling numbers on his approval of how he's handled national security, they're very low. So if she's going to choose something to criticize the administration about, it might be this, but then that puts the focus on her time at the State Department. What is the foreign policy record? The fact that she did work very closely with the White House on that foreign policy initiative. And it just, again, shows how out of touch she is. I mean, the FBI, this is not a foreign problem that is happening only in Iraq and Syria. The FBI in the United States has 1,000 open cases and pursuing leads on ISIS. I mean, this is a problem that affects people here, and that's what they're worried about.
Well, Andrea, it's interesting because if it's true that Hillary Clinton is sort of leaning toward the Barack Obama way of doing things so that she can build a better wall in those early primary states, which I can't even imagine. I'd have to see how Bernie Sanders is envisioning his path forward now, because this might show she's a little weak there. But why would you, as Katie pointed out, pick out the very thing that President Obama is most criticized for to make yourself look like him?
Because she can't escape it. I mean, she presided over our rapid withdrawal from Iraq, where we basically just handed the country over to the jihadists, along with $1 billion in weaponry that they're using against our men on the front lines. I mean, this is the greatest failure of an administration in foreign policy in the Middle East in ever. And you look at the Arab Spring that she presided over, Egypt, Libya. You go down the list, Harris. You look what's happening in Afghanistan. This is all the Clinton-Obama foreign policy. And she took the lead, and she takes credit for Libya in her book, Hard Choices. She does. She says, this was my decision. I'm the one that took ownership of that and Benghazi. So she has a lot of questions to answer. We know that she is incompetent, but worst of all, she looked the families of those 4 dead Americans in the eye, and she lied to their face. And there is nothing more despicable than that.
Katherine, real quick before we move on, the way that she got into the fact that we are at the right place where we need to be in our strategy, her contenders, the primary contenders on Saturday night, Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley, were saying that they were criticizing her for backing regime change in places like Libya and Syria. And she countered with those were complex problems and then said the line that everybody's talking about today. So she was trying to pivot.
Right.
Apparently.
Right. I guess that she has to hope that everything's fine because she's shown her record that she's really bad at this stuff. Because of her is why we're in this situation, like you were saying, for so many different reasons. So maybe she really does think it's fine because she really doesn't ever have seemed to have understood what's going on over there. I would like to see her take responsibility for something or answer one question or something. But right now she's just saying, oh, no, it's fine. Oh, no, this and that. Oh, yeah, by the way, Donald Trump's the worst, huh? And that's really all she's doing.
Wow. All right, we'll move on. President Obama is saying ISIS is not powerful enough to destroy the United States. So they're both talking about it. And then going on to sort of point the finger at the media, accusing them of fanning the flames of fear. We'll debate it. And by them, I mean, well, you know, those of us in the media. And a brand new chapter on what manages to offend college students these days. Here's a hint. Yum. It's food. For real. And there's more Outnumbered live online when the TV version of us wraps up. Go to foxnews.com/outnumbered. Click on the Overtime tab. OT, baby. There's a live chat. Get in on our conversation there. And if you're going social, hashtag that OT, baby.
Well, President Obama again trying to reassure a jittery public on the war against terror. In a year-end interview with NPR, the president saying ISIS cannot destroy the U.S., but that he understands why people are worried, and that his administration may have fumbled its anti-ISIS communications strategy. But the president also seems to blame the media for stoking fear.
ISIL combines viciousness with very savvy media operations. And as a consequence, if you've been watching television for the last month, all you've been seeing, all you've been hearing about is these guys with masks or black flags who are potentially coming to get you.
In the meantime, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee wants the president to pick up the pace and inject more urgency into the fight against ISIS. California Democrat Adam Schiff.
Well, the broad outlines of what the president wants to do, I think the right ones, it's not going fast enough. The pace is not going fast enough. I think we have to look for something to change the dynamic on the ground. And for me, that would be in the form of a safe zone or a buffer zone or a no-fly zone, something that can end the refugee flows, something that can give a space and time to train up forces to take on ISIS.
Well, for the record, President Obama has opposed a no-fly zone in Syria, saying that it could draw the U.S. into the Syrian conflict even more. Okay, I'm going to go to the journalist with the most Emmys on the couch, which would be Harris Faulkner. Faulkner, it's all your fault, says Obama.
Yeah, it's my fault.
You talk about this
too
much.
So
you should stop talking about ISIS.
Here's how we were talking about it over the last week, though. We kept talking about it because what did the president do on a Sunday night a couple of weekends ago?
He gave it a try.
Right, the first one of only 3 he's given in the 7 years in office, correct? Okay, and then what did he do next? He went to the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And he met with everybody, all the generals. They had a huge meeting. He came out and gave us an update. And then what did he do? He went to the National Counterterrorism Center out in McLean, Virginia. Then he came out and he did the same thing. What does that tell you? He has been trying to soothe the fears of the American public across 3 different huge occasions, capturing our attention. We're covering him talk about the people in the masks and the black flags. But he's not soothing the fear. So now he's going to turn it on us and blame it on us. No, it's back on you. It's your turn.
Is this real? I mean, a communications problem. I mean, it's pretty bad when you're blaming, you know, as the saying says, the people who buy ink by the barrel. But really, I mean, it is such an incredible, unbelievable move for the president to blame the media and then blame the public.
It's more than a communication problem. It's a lack of confidence problem in this president to adequately fight terrorism. And I would even extend it back to his response to the Paris attacks during the summit abroad in Turkey, in which he gave such a very weak response that people actually started to question, foreign leaders started to question him and his ability to really lead the world in this global coalition that he claims he's kind of doing to combat ISIS. You know what, Andrea, this goes to exactly Kat's point. This is a president whose not spoken policy is it's not my fault.
Right.
Yeah.
No accountability, and he has to allocate blame properly. He's very intelligent, actually, how he conducted this during the 2012 campaign. He's kind of like a prosecutor, rather a defense attorney in a jury trial. It's not that I'm innocent, but someone else could be guilty. And that's always the approach he takes. It worked during the political season in 2012. People are not buying it anymore. And Harris, to your exact point, that's why he keeps having to go out and try to quell these fears, because he's never doing it adequately enough.
So, Katie, he lives in this academic fantasy land, this dream world where he believes that his words can sort of part the oceans and heal the masses, or whatever mumbo-jumbo he used during the 2008 campaign. But this time around, when there are Americans dead in San Bernardino and troops we just learned today dead in Afghanistan because of radical Islamic jihadism, he seems completely out of touch. And I think that's scarier than anything.
Well, and the way he talked, they're going to come get you. Like it's some kind of funny situation when people have been killed as a result of this, when you have entire countries that have been lost to ISIS, when you have Iraq as a failed state now as a result of ISIS. And the president isn't upset because the news media is showing this stuff. He's upset because of the events that have occurred have exposed him as incompetent, have exposed him as a liar when it comes to radical jihad being on the run. We saw this in 2012 with them saying Al-Qaeda is on the run. And it exposes him as not willing to deal with the problem. And on one hand, he can't say, oh, well, I didn't watch enough cable news and therefore I wasn't aware of how serious this is and how people are scared about this, and then say that we're covering this too much. And I'm sorry, Mr. President, when Americans are beheaded on video by ISIS and you go off to the golf course, and then when people are killed in Paris and gunned down in San Bernardino, we're going to talk about it whether you like it or not.
Right. I mean, Kat, liberals typically aren't serious people when they talk about foreign policy. I mean, to Katie's point, they go golfing, they trivialize it, they keep their servers in toilets, you know. They don't take things seriously. And this is a serious threat, and the president's trying to trivialize it. It doesn't seem like it's going to work.
Problem.
Yeah.
Really what he's saying is, oh, it's not my foreign policy, it's the way the media is branding my foreign policy. It's because of that, which is obviously just so ridiculous because, like you're saying, there's actual events that are happening. People actually were just killed in San Bernardino. To say that, oh, you know, it's the media. No, people are afraid because we have something to be afraid of. How about that? No.
Right.
Well, they just devised a whole new terror alert system, so how could it be us?
Right.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't tell the president and his team to do
conflict
that.
with the generals and the Pentagon and everybody else who I do trust on this matter. So he looks completely unserious.
77% of people polled last week, and a very poll we talked about on this couch said that they are not feeling like we are where we should be.
No. And they're right.
In this fight.
They are right. All right, less than 6 weeks from the first presidential caucus and the nation's first primary. Right after that, new numbers on which Republican candidates hold the top spots in those states and how much it matters at this point in the race. And if you thought those fragile flowers that we call college students couldn't be offended by lunch, yes, lunch, food, you are wrong. And why sushi and sandwiches are making some kids need a really big safe space.
Glad you're watching Outnumbered. New questions today about whether the GOP candidates will be able to maintain their standing in those traditionally important early voting states. And right now, Senator Ted Cruz holds a pretty comfortable lead in the real clear political average in Iowa, with around 30%. Donald Trump trailing behind him, 26%, followed by Senator Marco Rubio, Dr. Ben Carson, and Jeb Bush. But it's a very different story in New Hampshire, where Trump remains the frontrunner, 28%. Cruz and Rubio both come in at 12%, with Governor Chris Christie and Jeb Bush rounding out the top 5. Things also looking good for Trump in South Carolina, where he has nearly 34% of the vote. Cruz, Rubio, and Carson take 2, 3, and 4 spots. Jeb Bush at 5th. At 7%. So I come out to you. You've worked on many campaigns.
Absolutely.
We effectively call you, or affectionately call you, Hobnob.
That's correct.
You've been around,
I accept
my friend.
and love the name.
What do you make of where Trump is? Where does he need to win? Or is it even about that, really, with him? Because he's been out front for so long.
Look, we for so long have been minimizing and trivializing Donald Trump's performance in these polls. And while I always put out the caveat that you really shouldn't make too much of polls, especially at an early stage, it's not that early a stage anymore. So I think we have to acknowledge fairly that Donald Trump is going to be a force of nature in these primaries. I will say, however, that the greatest gravitational force in politics is momentum. And if Ted Cruz wins that Iowa caucus, I think there's a reshuffling of a lot of these poll numbers, especially in South Carolina, where you are going to have more of a conservative electorate. And I've always suggested that Trump's real opposition to the Republican Party is not the establishment. It's not John Kasich. It's not Jeb Bush. It's not Chris Christie. It's from the conservative wing of the party, and that standard bearer right now, most effectively, is Senator Ted Cruz.
You know, Kat, I want to come to you just on where you think the momentum is coming from for Ted Cruz.
I think he's getting some of Ben Carson's support, probably. And I think that Iowa always made sense for Ted Cruz. Santorum won last time around. Religion and faith is more important to them than a lot of other things in a lot of other places. So it makes sense that they wouldn't support Donald Trump overall. But again, with polls, what I always say is that I bet you he has even more support than people are willing to admit, because a lot of people might not want to admit they like Donald Trump, but secretly they're on Twitter going all nuts for him.
Yeah, Andrea, I've heard you say that very thing many times. You've said that Donald Trump is like the joke in the room that nobody wants to tell the punchline to.
Oh, yeah. It's like an inappropriate joke. I mean, you look over both shoulders before you say, I kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I hear people doing. And so, yeah, I do think the polling's a lot higher for Trump. I want to yield some of my time to Hobnob, because we used to work on campaigns together. That's where you got the nickname. And I want you to break down a couple scenarios.
Yeah.
So we saw, Lindsey Graham drop out of the race today. I'd love your thoughts on where his 0.0067% goes. If the others drop out, break that down for us, too. And also walk us through a scenario where if Ted Cruz takes Iowa, I don't see him taking New Hampshire. It doesn't seem suited for him. That seems suited more for a Trump.
The numbers don't support it now.
They don't, and they won't. The demographics
tight,
just
right?
aren't
Like
in his favor. It's not a state that really plays to that area of the Republican Party. Break that down. Then what happens after that?
Well, look, Donald Trump without a doubt, has sincere support in New Hampshire, which likes to kind of, as a primary group, they have quirky behavior sometimes. You know, they don't go for that standard bearer of the Republican Party. And I've talked to many people on the ground who actually think that Donald Trump's organization on the ground is very strong in New Hampshire. His campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, used to be a big grassroots activist. Where else? In New Hampshire. So that's definitely Trump's firewall if he loses Iowa. And then he goes into South Carolina on much stronger footing to take on Ted Cruz. Now, Ted Cruz's other advantage, however, is March 1st is what we affectionately call the SEC primary. Most of the southeastern states are all going to hold their primary on the same day. Trump and Cruz have a very similar dynamic as they do in South Carolina in those states. So if they both go into this with serious momentum, you could really begin to see the end of the bromance, because they're going to have to start engaging each other directly. Meanwhile, I'll only say this real quick. I think the person who is kind of slow and steady here is Marco Rubio. He's not done enough to cement himself in the kind of second place spot in any of these polls. We see that he's always tied somewhere with Ted Cruz. But his candidacy is, I think, the fail-safe for the establishment if they feel that Cruz or Trump are going to go too far along.
Which is why Jeb Bush should drop out of the race, so that those establishment donors can go to someone who's actually a viable candidate.
I like where your head's at, Pavlich.
And what about Dr. Ben Carson, though? Because I could almost see a split in South Carolina. I mean, if he doesn't go away, he still has that component of evangelical voters that have not drifted yet away from him.
I think that's probably true, but I think Ben Carson has really been hurt by his especially in the last debate, his explanation of how he would really handle foreign policy and terrorism when it's the #1 issue for voters.
And he's just canceled that trip to Africa and Israel, so he's probably not going to get any more on-the-ground experience.
Right, exactly. Well, moving on to something less important. Students at one liberal arts college are offended by what they call the culturally inappropriate dishes served at the school cafeteria. Students at Oberlin College in Ohio are so upset over the sushi and General Tso's chicken, they're demanding meetings with school officials to discuss the matter. And students are complaining that the dishes are less than fully authentic. Quote, "It was ridiculous. How could they just throw out something completely different and label it as another country's traditional food?" And, quote, "When you're cooking a country's dish for other people, including ones who have never tried the original dish before, you're also representing the meaning of the dish as well as its culture. So, if people not from that heritage take food, modify it, and serve it as authentic, it is inappropriative." Okay, so Kat, going to you first.
Yes.
Don't you think these kids should be in class?
Yeah.
Instead of meeting with officials about lunch?
I don't like these kids at all. If you feel personally victimized by sushi, I'm happy that you've never had a real problem, but shut up, because some other people have. Plus, not only are they ridiculous, they're also stupid. Because General Tso's chicken is originated in the United States, so they didn't even bother to check that out first. It's American food, so that should be like the one thing the cafeteria is allowed to serve. You know, we can't say anything. Now we can't eat anything.
We're all going to die.
You know what? If you can afford this school that costs $50,000 a year, things probably aren't that bad for you, and maybe you should try to adopt an air of gratitude rather than just constantly whining about nothing.
But Andrea, doesn't this go to the point of these kids, and I guess they're immature young adults, this is a product of the first world problem, right? They actually have nothing else to complain about. So instead of saying we're starving and don't have food and eating top ramen like I think our parents did, they're now complaining that this food is culturally insensitive because they have nothing else to complain about.
I've guzzled some top ramen myself in between campaigns when I didn't have a job. It's delightful. It is a staple.
It's also racist.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's very.
They're babies, and it's unfortunate because they are the future. And as you point out, Kat, I mean, who really, if sushi is your biggest problem, I mean, Jeremy Piven had a giant problem with sushi, but I don't see this as being a real struggle.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the stick-up that is colleges and universities. $60,000 a year, university presidents making hundreds of thousands of dollars in tuition. It is a stick-up, and no one's learning.
Yeah, Tony, isn't it, though, in the sense we call them baby special snowflakes, but when they're demanding to have meetings with the administration, demanding that people be fired for doing certain things, isn't that bullying instead?
Listen, I grew up in a Lebanese household. My mother made phenomenal hummus and baba ganoush. I went to GW first day of freshman year, saw there was some in the refrigerator. I grabbed it, I ate it, and it stunk. And guess what? I didn't eat it anymore. I didn't necessarily go complain or write a letter.
Did you cry?
What I did? Well, I went home often though. So here's what I love about the story most. post is it was all in an effort by the university to engage in nutritional diversity. This was a PC program that now the liberal, politically correct student body seems to be rejecting. So I love liberal PC on liberal PC violence, and that's exactly what's happening.
So Harris,
no
what is your
good
favorite?
deed goes unpunished,
right?
By what you're saying. And what's really sad about it is, I mean, it doesn't give you that opportunity to walk away from just tolerating to celebrating. Because now we're stuck in that nebulous zone of having to talk about whether or not it was good enough to even make that journey to celebrating another culture's food.
Taco Tuesday is tomorrow, everyone. So just put it on your calendar.
Yummy.
Oh, boy.
All right. Well, now we turn to what may be the biggest mistake in the universe. A major and embarrassing mix-up at last night's Miss Universe pageant. Host Steve Harvey apologizing after mistakenly announcing the wrong winner.
I have to apologize. The first runner-up is Colombia. Miss Universe 2015 is Philippines.
And then that awkward moment for all of eternity, Miss Colombia having her crown unceremoniously removed and put on the head of the rightful winner. Oh, God. Harvey quickly took to Twitter saying, quote, I want to apologize emphatically to Miss Philippines and Miss Colombia, misspelling the names of both countries. And adding, this was a terribly honest human mistake, and I am so regretful.
Wow.
But some are now wondering whether the whole thing was some sort of publicity stunt. Today, the Washington Post pointing out that Harvey's cue cards indicating the names of the winner and runner-up were clear, very clear, written, I should say, in large
He talked about
print.
it. He even turned his card around to show the camera that it was correct on the card and that it was his fault for misreading it. But I got to tell you, Steve Harvey, you need a publicist today. And get off Twitter, especially without the spell check.
Yeah.
I mean, it is now, it's taken on a whole new, you need Tony Sayegh.
There you go.
He's never going to be able
to help you.
My first thought was, like, it could have been worse. Like, what if he was reading paternity test results or something like that? Like, he can never take over for Maury now. Yeah, that was the glass half full. I don't know if that was his career move in the future. That's over. But, yeah, I mean, maybe the Miss Columbia should sue for emotional damages. They should both sue for emotional damages.
Well, there's a report that the lawyer for the Miss Universe is eyeing a suit against the Miss Universe firm. I'm looking at that now. I would like to just confirm that on my own, so I'm going to say that this is a report at this point because I can't independently.
I mean, Katie, you've got one job. One job to do.
Your only job.
Most important moment. And I was sick for her. I was truly sick for her.
I was sick for both of them.
Yes, but an internal optimist. I mean, one got the crown. It was like Miss Congeniality.
It was awful.
Steroids,
it was,
without the bomb going off.
Donald Trump would say, I'm going to make the Miss Universe pageant great again.
Yeah, he was like, see?
No, I felt awful for the girls. This is something that this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. They've worked for this their entire lives, the families, the countries they come from. This is the thing that they do, and it was ruined because I think what Steve Harvey did is he tried to remember rather than reading the card, and that's what happened. I mean, he tried to just remember and ad-lib it, and he screwed up big time.
Okay, this is Pageant Ghazi officially. Do you know how long it takes these women to get those behinds? Months and months of preparation.
I have the same problem.
You're an eternal optimist, and so am I. And so I think Miss Columbia, at least, I mean, people are looking at her. Usually we get the Miss Universe results and we see the picture and we go, oh my God, they're so beautiful. Well, now we're seeing both of them. Is there an upside to this?
So the way I conclude it is there's two winners last night, especially if you think about it from the perspective of America's sympathy, the world's sympathy, compassion for both. Clearly, I think they're both going to have ample opportunity for endorsements. I think this is the most relevant runner-up we've ever had in the Miss Universe pageant, right?
Yeah.
So clearly, I think there is going to be some sort of silver lining, although it was devastating last night. Look, I'll tell you something. I said this about Donald Trump's announcement speech. Saturday Night Live could not have written it better than what happened last night. I mean, it was an absolutely kind of terrible moment where you think, wow, did that really just happen?
Compounded by the fact that they ran out of time. So what you saw at the end of the show was the taking off the crown of one and trying to get it on, but then you didn't even get to see it all the way on there. You had to like go to social media to see the finished product, and I mean, it was just really, she didn't get her moment. Neither one of them.
Yeah, her moment was ruined,
sad.
and she didn't
But you're
get
right.
hers.
They forever.
Yeah.
That moment is cemented, and they can work it.
She's gonna get like a good deal out of it. Let's follow up on this story.
I know the Kappa Lambda Nu Greek Week pageant. I won that one, and I had a lot more time to wear the crown. It wasn't as glamorous, yes, but it was equally as.
Do you still have the crown? Did they let you?
I want
keep
photos.
I still have the crown. I believe it was a paper crown.
Oh,
nice. Well deserved. Well deserved.
Yes.
There's a video out there somewhere.
What was your
An
talent?
NFL superstar. I'll tell that during overtime. Ooh. An NFL superstar with a bunch of penalties for some nasty altercations with an opponent, but still allowed to finish the game. So is Odell Beckham Jr. getting special treatment because of his star status, and should he be suspended?
All right, let's talk football. The NFL is taking some heat after referees failed to eject New York Giants superstar Odell Beckham Jr. from yesterday's game against Carolina. He got into repeated altercations with the guy covering him. Beckham was caught slapping, hitting, pushing Panthers corner Josh Norman multiple times, and at one point even slammed into him helmet to helmet. Beckham drew 3 personal fouls, but for some reason was allowed to finish out the Giants' loss, karma 38-35. Critics complaining Beckham is receiving special treatment because of his superstar status. But in an NFL statement, we learned, quote, the disqualification of a player is a judgment made by the on-field officials. The actions of the players involved in unsportsmanlike conduct will be reviewed as per the standard protocol that is followed in all situations of this type throughout the season. End quote.
And we've only had 2 ejections this year compared to 14 all of last season, and it's largely because the NFL thought they kind of nipped this problem in the bud in the beginning of the season. They had gotten so much bad press over the last couple of years, that they had these kind of sensitivity training videos that they assumed all these players were going to take to heart. Look, I'm an Odell Beckham Jr. fan. I love the Giants. That was inexcusable. And let me tell you something else. Talk about karma being a you-know-what. That first half, Odell Beckham Jr. did a lot of hitting with Josh Norman. Didn't do a whole lot of catching. Didn't catch one pass. In fact, he dropped a touchdown pass. So when you talk about a 3-point loss to the best team in football, that catch in the beginning of the game sure would have been nice. So I think Odell Beckham is going to have some sort of fine for sure. I'm not sure how extreme the penalty is going to be, but it was disappointing at the very least.
Wasn't the arguments from some of the teams about why he was not thrown out is because he needed to learn how to handle this on the field? I mean, that was the most ridiculous excuse. Well, he needs to learn how to control himself on the field, so we're just going to leave him there to continue this really bad behavior and give him special treatment. I mean, that's ridiculous. You should have the same treatment as anyone else would based on the rules of the game, not based on who you are as a player.
All right, this is probably a mom talking to me, but this drifts away from football now. This gets into the zone of personal responsibility to me and special treatment and what we will as a society allow and what we won't. What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, see, this is why I hate football. I love when bad things happen in football, so then I can blame it on that. I don't like football. Everyone loves football. Then all the sports bars can turn into bars where they play forensic files, and I can go watch my true crime. That's my dream, but it'll never happen.
That sounds exciting.
Because he's
sign me up for that.
Yeah, I'm gonna crush in a nursing home someday. I'm just gonna crush. I mean, of course, there's never any accountability for any of these people. That's what it's like to be a superstar of any kind. But because people love the football and they love the Holly, it doesn't really matter. This isn't going to matter at the end of the day.
I love
it's about money.
Yeah.
But you like drinking in the middle of the day without
Yes, I do. So I went to the sports bar and I tried to watch the game, and I wound up journaling in the corner, and nobody likes that.
Are you coloring or journaling? Because I like
journaling.
To color.
I had some stuff.
Look, day drinking, yes. Unsportsmanlike conduct, no. I'm going to take something from you, Harris, and you're exactly right. When you think about this from a parenting perspective, and I would just spend an entire season of flag football with every kid wanting to be Odell Beckham Jr. They're trying the one-handed catch. They're all getting the personalized jerseys with his number. You have a bigger responsibility when you're a superstar, and if you can't conduct yourself with some sort of sportsmanship and professionalism, and you get it once, you get it twice. This was all game long.
But doesn't it point to a bigger problem with the NFL? I mean, you could apply what you said earlier about the NFL and their treatment of certain issues the way that they handle domestic violence. It's like they cherry pick when they're going to enforce the rules and take things seriously. So it's a credibility problem, I think, on the part of the NFL.
Yes, but this incident was definitely coach-driven and I think umpire-driven, too.
Okay. Outnumbered. We're making more. Come back.
Thank Thank you for joining us today. More Outnumbered on the web. We want to thank Tony for joining us,
Great
and
to be
Katie
here.
and Kat, and we'll see you on Outnumbered Overtime and back on TV tomorrow. Thanks, everyone.
Outnumbered Overtime, OT baby. So I'm on my phone at the end of the show because we're talking about the Miss Universe thing, and I'm looking to see, because there are some reports that there could be some lawsuits flying, but we'll have to see how that shakes out. But what do you guys think the real issue is here? I mean, seriously, the right woman got her crown.
Mm-hmm.
A week from now, will we be talking about this?
You probably.
In our world.
Yeah, I think probably, right? But I got to tell you something. This seems to me, if you believe just no conspiracy theories, to be ineptitude on behalf of Steve Harvey and basically hubris, which is why I really feel bad for the guy, but at the same time.
I don't, actually.
I was going to say, but at the same time, you kind of think to yourself, what was he thinking?
Well,
That's a huge responsibility.
You took the job. You took the responsibility of the job. You have this whole ceremony, and as Harris mentioned during the show, they ruined it for the girl who actually won because they were rushing at the end, and they actually didn't get to finish out the awkward transferring of the crown that had already been put on someone else. And you know, Steve Harvey had one job, and he really screwed it up. And I think what he did is he looked at the card and said, oh, I know who won, and decided not to use the card. And that's a very egotistical, arrogant thing to do. And he said the wrong name and caused a real big problem. So he had one job to do. I feel bad for the girls. I feel bad for all the work their families have put into this. I mean, it really is. We make fun of pageants, but it really is a lot of work. It's hard.
It is a lot of work. And I was not kidding about the time that they spend on their figure. I mean, it is a trainer of mine used to train the Victoria's Secret models and the Miss USA contestants. And when he gets into the actual training that's involved and the nutrition, I wouldn't want to do it. I mean, I wouldn't. It's really hard. And the hours, and it's important to them. I mean, everyone has their thing in life which matters to them, and these girls spend their whole lives. And they're representing their country, which is such a big deal.
Yeah. That's part of the challenge now too, as you're seeing in some of the social media, you know, people who from both those countries or, you know, Philippines feels like they kind of got robbed too, because why didn't you just read the name on the card?
Right.
I mean, it's a simple question. Fac on our live chat says, #StandWithSteve. Jed Lover says, he messed up bad.
Yeah.
I mean, this is hard for him. I suggested he hire I'm sure he has one. Might want to put her on Overtime, her or him, the professional publicist.
You talked about, you know, how they both benefit. And I see that too. I mean, if we're going to look at the upshot, there is some benefit to it, that they're both well known. I mean, typically, like I said, you only hear about the winner, and maybe the woman next to her is usually just going, real defeated in the photo. But we're hearing more about this pageant than we ever have.
Yeah, I didn't know it was happening.
And not to take away from
every man in America disagrees with you.
I didn't know it was a pageant.
CSI, right? A rerun?
Last night.
Investigative Discovery.
I love Investigation Discovery and
watching Miss Universe is a very good way to diversify.
I don't want to. I never will.
Your knowledge of the world.
Right. So there's some talk now, some chatter on the live chat. VanMan243 writes, suspend Odell Beckham for his next 5 games. Pretty strong reaction people are having.
Well, considering that the Giants are probably not going to go to the playoffs now, I don't think he'll have plenty of time.
Is that guy not a Giants fan? That's probably why he said that.
Yeah, you know, here's what's disappointing. You know, the Giants have had a really tricky season. They've gotten some momentum. They beat my Dolphins last week, but they are my favorite New York team. Yeah, Odell Beckham made yesterday about him, and he should have made it about his team. And if you contrast it with the way Josh Norman handled it, the defensive back, you know, this rivalry was brewing all week. Sports reporters were talking about it. These are two of the best in the game facing each other. High stakes game because the Panthers obviously are undefeated. They wanted to keep that. Giants are fighting. You know, every game is relevant for them at this point in a very challenging NFC East. But at some point, Norman made it about his teammates, and he stepped back. The Panthers coach actually intervened with Norman and told him to basically cut it out in the beginning. Coughlin never did that. Eli Manning never did that. And that was the real disappointment. So while, Andrea, I totally agree with you, the NFL has some soul searching to do and has to bear responsibility. In yesterday's incident, this was a complete failure of both the coach and then of the umpire staff to not enforce what was obviously the rule of the NFL, which is that conduct couldn't be.
Do you think that they're not doing it because they think that they can get away with it? I mean, we've seen before failings from team members, and the one that can really and the one that can really enact change and enact discipline is the coach.
Yeah.
And we saw that in Baltimore. We've seen this before, and you wonder, why doesn't the organization penalize? And we know they're not going to penalize because there's money behind it.
Right, money.
And when they do it so arbitrarily, it doesn't even have real meaning. I mean, then you'll have the Players Association come up and defend them, and then around and around we go, the dog chasing its tail, tail chasing the dog. Mary Ellen 1539 describes Outnumbered Overtime as this. Think of it as a workout, and this is your cool down phase. Just wanted to share.
Just stretch it out?
Yeah, just stretch that bad boy out.
Where's the water in the towel?
Lindsey Graham left the race today.
Stretching.
We didn't talk about it much.
Breaking news.
Did you hear about how Hillary Clinton stays fit on the campaign trail through yoga and hot peppers?
I think we knew that from the email server.
That's a big news today.
No?
I don't even
know what Lindsey Graham does.
I don't want to talk
nothing
about
now.
Yeah, nothing now. He doesn't need it anymore.
What are your thoughts with him gone?
I think Andrew made, I think, the most important empirical point. I think Andrew made the most important empirical point. You know, he was at 0.0001. Look, Lindsey Graham is a patriot. His opinions about ISIS and combating the war on terror, I think, are very strong and had a big positive impact, I think, in the national dialogue, albeit not the presidential race.
You do?
But
I think he was so grossly wrong, and I think he has so little credibility among the base because of the positions he's taken in the past with the amnesty bill and advocating for the Arab Spring. I mean, listen, we had him on that outnumbered couch. He sat exactly where you sat, and he could not answer the question that I asked,
I don't know.
which is not even close.
Thank you.
Which is, was the Arab Spring a success?
Right.
You supported it, and he could not answer that question, along with a number of other questions we asked him.
Andrew, and I think you're right, but let me just say one thing about Lindsey Graham, and by no means am I a fan. Look, I think Rand Paul's positions, as much as I disagree with them, are helpful to our debate, and I think Lindsey Graham's positions on the extreme side are helpful to our debate.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham, though, I do give him credit for this. Without him, without John McCain, without Joe Lieberman, President Bush would not have had the backing to do the surge in Iraq, and that was a success, and that actually did stabilize the country until President Obama withdrew.
Fair enough. On a presidential level, though, you know, Lindsey Graham was making the same arguments in the Senate as he was making on the campaign trail, and I'm of the opinion that if you have zero chance of winning the nomination, don't get in the race. You know, the American people are frustrated with politicians because they think that they're all about themselves. Well, that's half the Republican field right now, like the Rick Santorums and Lindsey Grahams, who are in that second-tier debate, and then you get up to the first tier, and there's still people there who have no business staying in the race. And people are frustrated because they're saying, this is really how the American political system is now, because it's all about the people running rather than about the direction.
Yeah, but Rick Santorum doesn't have any vices, so he has nothing else to do.
He won Iowa,
but run for president
Guess
over
what?
and over.
Jeb has some cool stuff to do. He doesn't need this, remember?
Yeah.
He doesn't like being the front runner.
Ago, and he's still doing this. Well,
he's glad he's not
the
up
American
ahead.
people decide this, though, by going to their events and by taking part in the polling that puts these guys wherever they are, whether that's real or not. So it is interesting to see how long they'll stick around, I guess as long as the money is there. But many of them have been under 3% and 1% for quite some time.
Yeah, I think the Vegas debate showed us that we have to have a bit of a narrowing on this stage. I think Rand Paul has overstayed a bit too long.
Although he moved up to the big
soon-to-be John Kasich. Well,
Jackie, maybe?
Well, if you don't look at the undercard and you don't consider, you know, the Huckabees and the Patakis and the Santorums, which is mostly where we've seen people leaving is from that undercard crowd, I think it's going to be hard for Rand Paul to sustain or John Kasich to sustain these numbers much longer. I mean, they're, I think, below 3% or just that.
And Rand has a Senate race to worry about in Kentucky.
And that's exactly right.
That's interesting.
That's a serious problem that he could be facing in Kentucky of losing a Senate seat. So
isn't that the tacky dude still in it, too?
Who's that?
I love the former Gov, I have to say, on a personal level, but I think he'd be better off.
At some point, you have to make a decision. What is best for the country, and there are only so many resources on the Republican side, and we are stripping them away in a primary when we're going to need them to battle Hillary Clinton, right? So at what point do you go, okay, I have the backing of all these donors. I'm going nowhere. For the betterment of the country, for the party, for the nomination, I should step away and encourage the people behind me to support X candidate that is going to do a better job than
Katie,
I can right now.
You're so right. And I think it's very disappointing to see the way that the party's behaving, because it disgusts me to see Bernie Sanders open the debate by, you know, placating Hillary, and the last debate laughing and saying, I'm sick of her emails. But the Democrats coalesce around one person. And this is such a coronation. I mean, she's got the superdelegates. It's not even a question. It is disappointing to see, And I think what makes it really disappointing is, that, as you point out, the best thing to do for the good of the party, which they all say they want to represent, is to drop out. And so their words mean nothing, because people say, well, if that's true, then you would drop out of the race. But they're all in it for themselves. Right. And a plum position at the EPA, which we know that George Pataki's angling for.
And he'd be great, by the way.
Exciting.
Yes. All right, real quickly. Desperate for Truth says, what is going on with the FBI's investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails? I don't understand why no recommendation has been made to the DOJ. We don't know what they have yet. We're waiting for the FBI to tell us.
Comey did say that they're not going to allow political pressure to influence their investigation.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think we need to remind the American people that the leading candidate for the Democrat nomination is under criminal investigation by the FBI. It seems to have kind of gotten lost in the news cycles of late, because she really does, and Andrea, you mentioned this in a couple times, have a trustworthy and honesty problem beyond the generic honesty and trustworthy problem everybody running for office has. So.
You know what our problem is right now?
We're out of time.
We're out of time. Oh my gosh. We'll see you back.
OT.
OT is over. Back on TV tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern for Outnumbered.
12 Eastern.
12 Eastern.
I like it.
I like that. Something Bodito was
See ya.